Okay, this is Amber McClendon, and it's the 11th of October, or September, sorry, 1998, and I'm with Herb Luzader.
Luzader. No N.
I said it good earlier, and Luzader, and he was in the 23rd Division Artillery.
No. 12th Armored Division.
Houston.
No, we're here.
Right. We're in Houston.
Okay. Well, what was the? You said something about 23rd.
Oh, you're not in the 23rd? You weren't in the 23rd?
No, it's 12th Armored
12th Armored Division.
Artillery.
Okay.
The 23rd's a tank battalion.
Because on my sheet, my cheat sheet, it's typed in wrong.
Okay.
So you're in the 12th
Armored
Armored Division.
Division Artillery
Division Artillery
Headquarters Battery.
Headquarters Battery. Well, now we have it straight.
Well, when you said 23rd, there is a tank battalion for that.
Right,
Oh, but
right.
I wasn't in tank battalion.
I was like, okay.
You do edit these things, don't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
We have an editing bay and everything, so we're safe. Okay. Well, if you wouldn't mind, just tell us where you were born and what your parents did.
I was born in a little town called Kirkland, Indiana, which is roughly 30 miles north of Indianapolis. Back in January of 1925, went to the town that has roughly 600 people in it. Still does today. All my schooling through high school was at the Kirkland School, all 12 grades. Graduating from there in April of 1943, May the 3rd, I was in the Army at Fort Benjamin Harrison, drafted. I did not enlist. Where do we go from here?
Well, you answered my question was going to be how did you get in the Army, and you told me you were drafted. So.
Yes.
Did you start off with the 12th Armored, or?
No. Okay. I was sent to Camp Walters, Texas for infantry basic training. I was there from the middle of May 1943 until December 1943, when I went to Camp Maxey, which is at Paris, Texas, and was there awaiting assignment to Texas A&M University, where I was in the ASDP program for about 4 weeks, and they closed the program, at which time I and a group from A&M were transferred to the 12th Armored Division at Camp Barclay. I know I was there before Easter of that year, and because I happened to have our Easter program that our headquarters battery had on that Easter Sunday. About 2 weeks later, I was sent to Fort Knox, Kentucky for a radio school. They needed extra radio operators in our division artillery headquarters battery. After approximately 13 weeks at that, and the only time in the Army I ever got to go home, I came back to Camp Barclay, and we immediately started getting ready to prepare equipment to go overseas. When I was first assigned to the 12th Armored Division, I expected to go in the infantry because of my infantry basic training, but I got real lucky and was too short for the armored infantry. Thank heaven. Excuse me. So I got put in the artillery, which was one of my most lucky days. After getting back from Barclay, I was assigned to help prepare radios for overseas shipment. We had to coat them with material so that they would not get wet going over on the boats. And so after a certain length of time, we departed Camp Barclay and went to Camp Shanks for our departure to Europe.
Okay, can I ask you a couple
Sure.
questions? I guess, well, I'll start with the ASTP. You
Okay.
said you were in that. And you're only in it for 3 or 4 weeks?
Yes.
You said. Did you apply for it? How did you get in that program?
When we were drafted into the Army, they gave us like an IQ test. And if your IQ was high enough, now I don't know what the parameters were, but you could be eligible for this college training. And they were all interested in training people to be engineers, various college level skills. The program had been going on for some time before I was drafted, but in the early part of 1944 they decided, we don't have time to do this, we're going to put these people in the regular Army units and ship them wherever but they were needed. And the school or the program was closed all over the United States unless someone had like 3 or 4 years in it. Then they would figure they had time to make use of their skills. But for the 12th Armored, there were hundreds of us that were transferred to the 12th Armored. How many, I have no idea. But whenever we have our reunions, they have an ASDP dinner, which happens to be today. But and there's quite a group of them still coming. So, but when they closed the program, everybody's out. And you go here, here, and here, and that's the very quickly. You wasn't much choice about it. When we then went to the 12th, we were interviewed for different jobs, and I got a lucky interview because I was short. And yet, friends who I was with in Texas A&M, almost all of them went to the infantry, and I still see and meet with some of them in Indianapolis that happen to live in our area. Okay?
That's great.
I hope I answered your question.
You did. And then the next question was when you went to Fort Knox.
Okay.
And you went from Camp Barclay.
Yes.
Tell me, I haven't ever heard anyone say that before, doing these interviews, and I was wondering if you could tell me how many people went, if it was just you, or if there was a group of you, and what you did.
Well, from our battery, there were 2 of us. And we went to Fort Knox, Kentucky, to what they call radio school. There we were spent day after day listening to Morse code, da-da-da-da-da-dit-dit, and had to learn what that meant, all the various letters, both to send and receive. And we were then used, or to be backup radio operators for the ones that were assigned to that group permanently. And I do know that some of the fellows who were the radio operators in our unit regularly had also gone through the Fort Knox radio school. Fort Knox is the Armored Division central location. It is an armored, what they call an armored division, or not division, Army headquarters. And presently have General Patton's museum there, but that's way off base.
And you got back and you said you painted the radios or covered the radios. What kind of substance was it?
I think they called it cosmoline, which is a waterproofing material. This was done not just to radios, but other pieces of equipment. I think even, I wasn't involved with it, but I believe they even coated tank engines and things of that nature. Anything that they wanted salt water, seawater, not to damage was coated this way. And then after we got over to Europe, well, all of our equipment went to France and we went to England, so we got issued new equipment. They had a process to remove that stuff from the radios, etc. And what it was, I don't know. Didn't have to mess with it, but it would have been a gooey mess.
Well, I can imagine. Okay, well, thank you for answering those questions for me. Let's go back to where you were leaving Camp Barkley,
Mm-hmm.
and you were on your train ride. Do you remember anything about the train ride to Camp Shanks?
Oh, it was a long train ride. We went, our particular train that I was on went from Barkley north, wound up in Chicago, and from Chicago to New York. Various units went, the trains went different ways out there. How exactly, I don't know, but different companies or battalions went in different routes. It wasn't an uncomfortable ride. It wasn't the most luxurious, but it was tolerable. We didn't know, well, most of the fellows knew where we were going, but officially we didn't know. but when we got to Chicago and headed east, we were pretty certain where we were going to wind up. And wound up at, I believe it's Camp Shanks in New York, where we stayed until our boat was ready. We were loaded on the boat and took off.
What'd you do at Camp Shanks?
Nothing. I mean, we were there like 2 or 3 days, and
I meant recreation. Like, did you get
we got a pass to go to New York City. And when we went to New York City, there was a hurricane came through. So it rained like it is here. And it was a bad hurricane that come up the coast that year. But that was, we got passes, and I don't remember anything that happened at Shanks itself. But, you were, just waiting to get on the boat and get going, and we didn't know how long it would be or anything else. You don't want to hear about the boat ride, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure I do. That's my next question. Can you tell me about the boat ride?
Well, I have a problem with boats in that from the time we left New York for roughly 2 weeks, my meal ticket had 2 punches. The rest of the time, I was either laying in my bunk or on deck with what they call seasickness. That ain't good. But then you don't really care whether you eat or not. But that was my shortcoming going overseas. So that's all I did on board boat. I don't know what the rest of the guys did. I never saw them. It was quite an experience, and to this day, if we went any place, it wouldn't be by boat. So,
No cruises for you, huh?
pardon?
No cruises for you then.
Well, on a river or lake, I might manage it. But though I understand the boats are a little bit smoother riding today than they were back at that time. But we happened to be on the whole couple of things I do remember about the trip. We were on the flagship of the convoy, and we got news bulletins verbal or over the loudspeaker, and I think there were 7 submarines sunk as we were going across. And at near the end, when we were getting close to Europe, the convoy was broken up because of the submarine situation. Now, we didn't lose ship, as I understand it, but then we wound up landing at different ports than the one we might have originally gone into. In fact, we landed in England instead of France, but and the rest of the division did too. But I think originally we were scheduled to go into Cherbourg. May have pronounced it wrong, but instead of that, we landed on the west coast of England, someplace close to Liverpool. I don't think it was Liverpool, but in that area.
Okay, what do you remember when you landed? And what happened from then?
Well, the anchor hit the side of a boat, and I thought we'd been sunk. When they were dropping the anchor, and a thump, and my bunk happened to be up near the front of the boat where this anchor hit. And we thought we'd been hit by a torpedo, of course not knowing anything about where we were, but we found out later it was simply the anchor hitting the side of the boat. Then we were unloaded, taken by train to a place called Tidworth Barracks, was the name of part of it, and part of it's called Windmill Hill, which was a tent city where we stayed for 3 or 4 weeks. I don't know the exact time before going over to France.
Did y'all just prepare there, or did you train any while you were
there? We got equipment ready. We were given new equipment like trucks and jeeps and things of that nature, and they were made ready to take across the channel. There was a lot of modifications made to vehicles that for our comfort and safety. Like we put luggage racks in the back end of some of the trucks and put bars on the front bumpers of the vehicles that would cut a wire in case something was strung across the road or an area to decapitate whoever might be driving. But, and most of the vehicles were equipped or made that way, and we, the various mechanics and so forth, did ours. Some of us helped on it. Did get a pass and go to London. Went out to the Salisbury Plain to the huge cathedral out there, which is a beautiful place. So we had some time for rest and relaxation, as well as getting things ready to go over. From a training standpoint, I don't know of any. Excuse me. Whoops.
I'll get that for you.
Sometimes my voice sort of gives out, but if it does, you can edit it.
We'll edit it, and you have some water.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if that helps or not. Okay. Well, we were at Tidworth and Windmill
Yeah.
Hill.
They are adjoining, I don't know whether they were different properties or not, or different camps, but I guess there was, in one area, actually regular buildings. That was the barracks. And then many of us were in, well, I call Tent City. There were, tents that accommodated 5 or 6 people. I mean, they were big tents. And there was also a huge airfield adjoining this that bombers and gliders, and they took off from there one night to try to capture a bridge or an airdrop of glider pilots and parachutists and so forth, and many of them were taking off from this airfield. Now, we were not involved, of course. We could just see them. And it seemed like forever these planes were leaving that place that night or evening. We know nothing about the outcome of what they tried to do. We heard rumors, but who knows? In fact, it's the first time I'd ever seen a glider being taken off the ground with the airplanes that they used to pull them with. After, I'll say I'm going to say 3 weeks. I may be wrong. I don't remember times that well. We went down to, I believe, Plymouth, which was the port from which many of us, or many places, groups went to cross the channel. And that happened to be, we went down there, arrived there on the 10th of November of '44, because we crossed the channel, excuse me, on the 11th of November, which is easy for us to remember because it being Armistice Day from World War I. Excuse me. And I defeated the seasickness while we were crossing the channel because I took motion sickness pills till I passed out. And when we got across the channel up to Le Havre, and my particular truck that I was involved with pulled off the boat at 11 o'clock. At that time I was in what we called the wire section of Division Artillery Headquarters. We laid telephone lines out to the firing batteries and around the various places we needed to communicate with. On the truck that I happened to be involved with, I think there were 4 of us, plus the driver. And we had 3 different wire trucks, and so that we could, if conditions required it, we could lay our telephone lines to all the firing batteries, or firing battalions, and they in turn would be in touch with the batteries. When we got into France, we stayed at a place called Alfay, which is a little town up in northern France, and till the whole division got onto French soil and assembled. These things take time because you're talking about some 10,000 people, all sorts of tanks, all sorts of equipment, and then while we were there, nothing. Here we are waiting to find out where we're going to go next, with nothing in particular to do. But so you managed to kill time. You couldn't leave the area or anything like that. There was no place to go, and no way to get there. When they decided to send us to what they called the First Army, and our forward units forward party, I guess they called it, headed for First Army. Then they changed our orders and decided to send us to 7th Army instead. So we went to 7th Army, which was in, south central France, I would guess you'd call it. And then the group that went to First Army then had to make their way down to where we were. But it's one of those things that things get changed when they're talking about thousands and thousands of people. And First Army happened to be in the northern area of France and Belgium, etc., and we were wound up in the southern area. I guess the first assembly area was called an area called Nancy, which is south central France, south of Paris and east of Paris. On there again, we got the unit division assembled again after moving across an area probably roughly the size of Texas. I don't know for sure how France compares to Texas, but it would be something similar as land area. We were assigned to, like I said, the 7th Army, and went into combat on December, I think our division records say the 5th. I remember December 7th as when we fired our first, our artillery people fired their first shots, but that's my vague memory. Now, where do we go from here?
Okay, well, you covered that really well. Where did you go after that? What were you doing? What do you remember around December 7th, and when you first, how did you feel?
Well, your question about how we felt and so forth is very hard to describe. We were nervous. We had to get used to shells coming in, artillery, because being in the area where I was lucky enough to be in, we weren't usually subject to rifle fire or small arms fire. But artillery did come in occasionally. When we were out laying wire lines, we were away from our headquarters battery and out in the open. Occasionally we ran into some machine gun fire and rifle fire, and once you get the wire lines laid, the telephone operator, you go back to the headquarters till somebody cuts it or it's broken. Then you go out and try to fix it. One of the, not right at December 7th, but in that first week or 10 days, we had the wires laid out to one of the battalions. They were broken, so a fellow named Pete Higby and I were assigned to go out to fix the wire. And I don't know, there was 7 or 8 miles of wire out there. So we were going along trying to find out where we'd attach our phones to the wire and call to see where we could either get back to our headquarters or on to battalion. Well, we finally got the place where we could reach the battalion, but we couldn't reach back to headquarters. So we had to then work backwards to find where it was. And I was driving the truck, and Pete said, well, I'll start back and you go up and find a place to turn around in the truck and come back and pick me up. And we'll stop every so often we find the break. Well, we had gone over a hill before we found a break, and after we got there, Pete started back walking and I started up, found a place I thought it was safe to turn the truck around, turned around, came back, and as I was coming up the hill I heard somebody yell halt 3 times, and then a shot, and somebody's helmet hit the ground. I thought, well, they shot Pete? Luckily they hadn't. And they were GIs who had just moved into the area after we'd gone through. And Pete realized they were going to shoot, so he dropped on the ground. And his helmet hit the ground. But he didn't get hit. Excuse me a minute, please. Okay? But so that little incident turned out well. And we got back, and occasionally these things happen when you never know what to expect next. We moved on from that area through others that nothing unusual happened, I guess, until we got later on into the Herlesheim affair, which you girls may have heard about from other interviews. Again, our particular battery was very lucky. We during this particular time we were in a building that we later found out was a mental hospital. And we were there for about 10 days. So we razzed the guys about being in a mental hospital for a while. And in fact, yesterday I met a fellow who was in what we call Combat Command B, who was in that same mental hospital when I was. And we were laughing about it, but we, like I say, we're lucky that no one from our company got hurt, or our battery. We had some artillery shells and some rifle coming in there, but and we were there until the 36th Division relieved us. I think 36 was also called the Texas Division. They were originally formed in Texas. And we proceeded on, had some time off in an area in a town called Strasbourg, and beautiful city, still is today. It was there in May of this year, and then eventually we got to cross the Rhine near Mannheim. I guess the name of the town is actually Worms, but our unit crossed it at Worms, proceeded down into Germany. At this time, our units were moving so rapidly that we didn't have time to lay out much telephone wires. So I was transferred to an area called Message Center, which is also a part of the Division Artillery Headquarters batteries duties. And there my job was to receive messages from our radio operators, decode them, and pass them on to whatever the appropriate officer was for intelligence or supply or whatever. S1, S2, S3, and S4. Don't ask me which is which, I don't remember. And my particular job in that unit was when we were ready to move from one location to the next one. There were 4 or 5 of us assigned to a half track. We went up to the next location that we were to use and set up our new headquarters. When we had radio operations going and communication set up, the rest of the battery then moved up where we had found a place to stay. And our officer, when we come into the German town, we'd look for the nicest houses in town, because we knew that would be where the high-ranking Nazis might live. And they had a half hour to move out. And if they gave us too much of an argument, they had 15 minutes. And they were to take whatever they needed for the night. And they could come back the next day to get additional things if we were going to stay there. And that caused some consternation, I should say. But that's the way it was going to be. And my job was to find the kitchen. And we set up message center in the kitchen because there'd be tables or things like that. And we could also make coffee in there if they could find some coffee to make. But and then as soon as we had that set up, well, then the rest of the division, or rest of the headquarters battery, moved up to where we were.
Are there any interesting or stories or incidences that stick out in your mind about going to those houses and finding?
Well, there was a few things. One of my jobs was to see if we could find any food. And since we were in the kitchen, maybe we'd find some eggs or something. We'd liberate the eggs and have eggs and whatever else we could find that the mess truck didn't carry. They had powdered eggs and things like that. But we supplemented our mess truck food with items I could find. And as soon as the rest of the outfit got up there, they'd come in to see what we had for them. Sometimes nothing. You sometimes saw some contraband, like rifles or binoculars, things of that nature, what they weren't supposed to have, which we either liberated or destroyed, depending on what it was. There wasn't too much of that, really, but we did look for weapons and disposed of them somewhere or another if we found any. One thing that did happen that along these lines, it wasn't going into the houses, but when our division captured the bridge over the Danube River, of course the night before, which was in a little town, and they were fighting on one edge of town and we were on the other edge of town, and the next morning when I started decoding messages, while we were still in this town, and I took them in to give them to the officer, and he looked at it and he said, "Herb, are you sure this is right?" I said, "Yes, but I'll decode it again if you want me to try it." I had to do it 3 times before he believed it. And they had traveled almost 40 miles that night and captured the bridge. Because I didn't understand I didn't know where the bridge was or anything, but he showed me on the map. He said, "This is where we are, as you know." And he said, "This is where the bridge is." And he said, "I didn't think it was possible, but it was." And so my group immediately had to get in their half-track and go up to the bridge. And I happened to meet a friend of mine who was in the infantry there, Frank Zindel, and he was the first squad to go across that bridge. And he had come back and happened to see him, which was unusual. You seldom see anybody that you know in that situation. But and he was telling me about how lucky they'd been to get across there without blowing the bridge up. And Frank happens to live about a couple miles from where I do, and we see each other occasionally. One of our firing batteries was close to where we set up our new headquarters, and they had breakfast for us that morning, or we could eat at their mess truck. And the Germans were trying to blow up the bridge with bombers and floating mines down the stream, and I have a little bullet that I felt go past my ear. It didn't hit. I still have it. In fact, it's up in my room now. Stop it a minute. But then we proceeded on after that by down through Germany at various places, and finally wound up at a place called Murnau, which is actually in Austria, and that was where the fighting for our unit ended. That was May the 5th or something like that, and the VE Day was actually, I believe, the 7th or 8th. I had the pleasure of going back to these areas in May of this year. We visited Herleshheim, Bischweiler, the Dillingen Bridge. It was a fantastic trip. After the fighting was over, we were pulled off the line and wound up in different towns. After, I'll say 6 or 8 weeks, I don't know the time, they started breaking up the division based on points to send us home. And a group from Division Artillery was transferred to 6th Corps Artillery. Our whole division was split up. It never came home as a unit. And I was there until March of 95. No, 96. I lost a year in there someplace. And during this time, we had passes and leaves and so forth. I got to go to French Riviera for a week. I got to go to Switzerland for a week. I spent 2 weeks in Paris at an army school, which was held in the Palace of Versailles. But it was a time when you were literally doing nothing except waiting to get to come home.
What was that school like? What did you do there? What did you study?
The school we were there training to go back to our units to explain GI insurance. It was it was a form of insurance that, like life insurance, but it was kind of complicated, and they wanted people from various units to learn about it. I don't know why it took 2 weeks, but it was, and it was so that we could go back to the units and tell them about the insurance program that they had if we wanted to get into it. And we had some free time, so we went into Paris for a couple of times. But beautiful city. The most interesting leave I had was Switzerland. It was because there it wasn't torn up. You could walk down the street and go into a store. They had things to sell. We couldn't buy much of anything because to go into Switzerland, you were able to convert to Swiss francs $35, and that was the limit. Now, excuse me, your transportation was all taken care of, or we had paid for that separately. That wasn't part of the 30, and the hotels and our meals, 3 meals a day, were already in the fee that we paid for that. But we had $35 to spend, and the Swiss government had set up those rules to keep inflation down in their country, because they said if we allow hundreds of thousands of soldiers to come in with unlimited funds, or whatever funds they want to bring in, it will destroy our economy because of their spending ability that we need to control. And that was the reason for it. Now, some fellows were able to manage to get money mailed in or something like that, but it did help, keep them from having a runaway inflation. So, but it was, you could even go into a restaurant and get a cup of coffee or a sandwich, things of that nature, which for over a year we hadn't been able to do because there was nothing like that available. The French and the German communities just didn't have that kind of food. They were lucky to be able to feed their own people, let alone us. I suppose the biggest disappointment was the French Riviera, because I expected sand like our beaches, and it's all rocks. We had a good time down there, but it was just different than what we expected it to be, and usually at least 1 or 2 guys would be from your battery or company was with you, so that you knew somebody along the way. After that phase of Army life, we were, like I said, transferred to 6th Corps Artillery, and then to I'm going to call it a paper unit, because all it existed for was to sign people to ship home. And I had another marvelous sea journey. And I think I had 2 or 3 meal punches in my ticket that way. But they did put me in sick bay because I dehydrated. And so it wasn't quite as rough there, even though we went through a hurricane with 125-mile-an-hour winds and seas that were unbelievable. I heard, where I was at, you didn't see it, but one fellow was brought down to the sick bay who had been, he'd been in the mess hall, and a lot of food got spilled because of the rocking of the boat, and the floor was slick. And as he started out, he slipped and slid into the bulkhead, and about 10 guys lit on top of him. And when they brought him down to the sick bay, he said, "Damn, here I went through all this war, never got hurt, and he had a broken arm and a broken leg from that fall." And that poor guy, he was beat to death. But nobody could help it. And even the sailors were scared on that boat because of the size of the waves we were in. It wasn't just the GIs who weren't used to the water. I didn't know we were in a hurricane till sometime later on, and the old Army captain was talking about it. And he said, "Yeah, we came through a hurricane on the way home," and I happened to be with that captain. He was our battery commander from the time Camp Barkley clear through the war, and he transferred to 6th Corps Artillery with me, and went to that unit, and came home together.
What was his name?
Beg pardon?
What was his name?
William McWorkman. And I'd lost track of him until about 3 years ago when I learned of the association. Joined it. His name happened to be on the list, and along with Pete's, the fellow who I had the helmet problem with. And some of the others who, and some of them who are here, transfer, and I think only one of the other fellows that is here that went through that whole process. Some of different ones of us came home different ways because of the number of points we happened to have. We were discharged based on points we had accumulated, and that was for the time in service, battle stars, awards like a Purple Heart or Bond Star or something like that. Each counted. So everybody had different numbers based on, if nothing else, just the length of time we'd been in service. So, and it was a reasonably fair way of getting people home. You had to figure out something because you can't ship 1 million men across the sea on one day. But it's been a great experience meeting these fellows again, 50 years later.
Where did you go when you got home? Where did you go from there? Did you didn't stay in the Army?
Oh, no. I went back to Kirkland, Indiana first, and that was March or April of 1946. And in September of 46, I enrolled at Butler University, which is a small school of 3,000 or 4,000 students, which is at Indianapolis, and majored in accounting. Met my wife there. She was an education major. Roughly 4 years of college. After that, I went into private industry as an accountant for some 20 years. Then I became an internal revenue agent for another 20 years and retired in 1990. About the time I heard about this division association. So that's about all I've got.
Are there any stories or anything that you can think of that you didn't tell us that you'd want to say, or do you have grandchildren?
6.
20 years from now, is there anything you'd want them to know? Like if they were watching this, and what would you want them to know about your experience? I
don't know of anything special other than the highlights, which I think I have mentioned.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, others would pop into mind, I'm sure, with more thought, but I don't know what they are. Again, I was lucky because of my assignment, people I've met, and just had good luck the whole time we were over there. I thought only one of them ever got hurt while we were over there, and I found out the other day that there were two of them that did. And he had actually had a piece of shrapnel go through his hand. The second guy didn't, and I didn't realize it had happened to him. But I was in communications, and he was in metro section, I think, which did weather forecasting or checking weather and so forth. But in fact, he's here today. And but it's an experience I wouldn't want to have again. But we just hope that we never have to go to war again. But who knows?
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it.
Took longer than I thought.
And, I think Michelle has a question.
Okay.
I was curious, you mentioned you were in ASTP.
Mm-hmm.
Had you intended to go to college before the war began?
Oh, yes. In fact, when at the end of the first semester of my senior year in high school, I had enough credits to graduate, and I went to Purdue University to possibly enroll in January. And when I was over there, and I went through my records, and he said, "Yes, you have enough credits. We can accept you. Your grades are all right." But he said, "Your birthday is in January. If you are here, you'll be in the Army in February. If you stay in high school, they will let you graduate before you have to go." So I went back to high school rather than go in 4 months early, because at that time when you became 18, you were eligible for the draft, and depending on their quota or what they needed, you were taken immediately. And at that particular time, you signed up this month, and you'd probably go the next month. And I wasn't that anxious.